research doesn't back up the use of Epsom salts as a pesticide. They don't work as a pesticide. And magnesium in high qualities can lead to poor uptake of other nutrients. So if you're just throwing Epsom salts out there all the time, your plants could actually get other nutrient deficiencies because that magnesium is binding with other things in the soil and making it harder for your plant to take them up. And then for the palm trees and frizzletop is actually caused by a manganese deficiency in palms. So Epsom salts won't help because they're magnesium. So again, if you have a magnesium deficiency, maybe you could use Epsom salts, but there are more readily available slow release varieties of magnesium that you can buy at the store that are going to be more useful than just throwing Epsom salts on the ground. So that one, unproven in almost all cases for what people are trying to use it for. And then finally for our nutrient section, I hear a lot of people say grow beans as a companion plant in your garden to fertilize your other plants because they bind nitrogen, and that's going to make it so that the other plants have nitrogen available to them as well. Unfortunately, beans don't want to share that nitrogen with other plants until they are dead. So growing them as a companion plant doesn't really help from a nutrient sharing realm because they're not going to share those nutrients. Growing them as a cover crop though works really well. So nitrogen fixing plants like beans or other legumes are used in gardens as cover crops, and they can be used at a farming level as cover crops too. And a cover crop again is a plant grown between seasons. They can help keep weed populations down. They can help bind with nutrients in the soil and be used later to incorporate those nutrients back into the soil. So when you turn these into the soil before you start planting, those nutrients are going to be added back into the soil as the plant decomposes. You do want to make sure that you turn these before they go to seed. We tried to do cover crops in our demonstration garden here one year and didn't turn the beans before they went to seed. And we have cowpeas popping up for a couple of years afterward because of that. The other thing to keep in mind is, again, these have to decompose over time before those nutrients are available. So if you turn the soil and then immediately plant in it, it's going to take a while for these guys to decompose, and those soil microbes, again, are going to be pulling nutrients out of the soil a little bit before they put it back in again. So you want to make sure you're turning the soil with your beans or legumes a little while before you're planning on planting, so they have that time to decompose and add those nutrients back into the soil. Or you could pull them up, put them in your compost, and then spread the compost once they decompose there. So again, this one, partially true. Another thing that I get a lot of questions on is what about starting seeds and what's the perfect seed starter? I took out some of the goofier things from here that homeowners have asked me because you guys are master gardeners. I really feel like you probably aren't trying to grow seedlings inside of eggshells or inside of perfectly formed citrus peels. But if you do, one thing to keep in mind is neither of those decompose very quickly, so you will have to pull your plant out of those compostable containers before planting them in the ground. Otherwise, they might become root bound. So keep in mind when you're doing propagation, either seed propagation or propagation from cuttings, they're going to need water, they need light, you're going to need a growing medium of some kind, and sometimes for cuttings, you'll need a rooting hormone. And also keep in mind that there's a reason that we recommend buying fruit trees in particular from the nursery. So we get a lot of homeowners coming in and wanting to grow, and master gardeners, grow fruit trees from seed. And when it comes to things like mangoes and avocados and peaches and pretty much any fruit tree you can grow from seed, we have cultivated varieties that we have grown that do well here in Florida. Either they're disease resistant for Florida or they're climate tolerant for Florida. And when you grow seeds from the grocery store plants that you buy, there's no guarantee that that's going to be the exact same plant that you just ate. And a lot of times you're wasting time and space on a plant that's maybe not going to taste good, or it might be 15 years before you get an avocado off of it. So buying grafted plants, plants that have been grown, maybe from a seedling, and then a good, delicious variety grafted onto that or attached onto that to make it taste good is a better idea because you're decreasing the juvenility period and increasing the likelihood that you're going to like the fruit that comes off of that plant. So getting into cuttings though, like I said, sometimes you might need rooting hormone, and a lot of the myths that I found were, instead of buying rooting hormone from the store, what about the things that you have in your kitchen? Could those be rooting hormones? So the first one I found that I actually found pictures of from somebody trying this out was putting cuttings in potatoes for successful propagation. So you can see they've got some potatoes here, they've drilled holes in them, and they've stuck rose cuttings inside of those holes. And this was commentary on this particular post was, this is just like the settlers heading west that were trying to take rose cuttings from the East Coast over to the West Coast. We're going to keep them nice and moist, and it's going to be a good nutrient-rich location for these rootings to grow into. We do know rootings need moist, humid environments and a median for the roots to grow into. Rooting hormones can also help with plants that are hard to grow from cuttings. A potato, as it decomposes, may provide a moist growing medium for the roses or for the plants that you're trying to do, but you could also do that with some good potting soil and instead eat the potato. And one of the things I found when I looked into this myth even further was people were posting pictures of their rose gardens where they tried this out. And yeah, they had some little baby rose bushes growing, but the potatoes also grew. So they would have a rose bush, maybe a single stem coming up with a couple of little branches, being just overtaken by a potato plant as their potato rooted into the ground. So I would say with this one, it might work. I mean, obviously on those rose forums, their cuttings took and they were able to plant them. But instead of doing this, you could, again, use potting soil, eat your potato, and not possibly be battling with potato weeds in your rose garden or in your cutting garden later down the road. So on that one, I would say unproven. This really isn't a super useful way to try and grow cuttings. Another one I've seen is the enzymes in honey promote root growth in cuttings. And honestly, this is another one where I'm like, I'd rather eat the honey than use it for gardening, but I did do some research and found that while honey does have antibacterial and antifungal properties, it doesn't actually contain anything that would be considered a rooting hormone. So it might be helping out some people because their cuttings aren't rooting quick enough and they might be getting some of those fungal or bacterial problems or viral problems. But generally, your cuttings should be rooting before fungus or bacteria are ever a problem. So it's not something you should be worried about. So unproven on that one too. And then I've seen cinnamon. So cinnamon makes for a great rooting hormone. And again, this is another one where citrus does have antibacterial and antifungal properties. And I've seen it used pretty successfully by people growing orchids to try and keep their orchid roots a little bit cleaner and healthier when they're repotting the orchid plants. But it doesn't actually contain any rooting hormones. So this is another one where your plants should be setting roots and growing before fungus is really a problem in them. So if fungus is an issue with your cuttings, something else is probably going on. So unproven for cuttings. And then another one I found was using hydrogen peroxide to keep your plants clean from root rots, especially when it comes to seedlings and other fungal diseases. And also that it helps sprout seeds for new planting. And this is another one where there are some little elements of truth to it, but it really doesn't work the way that the myth says. So there was a University of Florida study on the effects of inundation with salt water in plants, and they treated plants with hydrogen peroxide and treated plants without hydrogen peroxide. And those that were fertigated with the hydrogen peroxide seemed to allow the plants to live better in higher salinity soils. Do you want to be fertigating your soils with hydrogen peroxide constantly, or instead maybe just buying plants that can grow in salty conditions? That might be up to you. It's not been found to actually prevent root rot though, and for trying to remove seed coats to help sprout them for new plantings, you'd need a much higher concentration of hydrogen peroxide than you as a homeowner can buy. So this is another one where there are little nuggets of truth in it, but really the way that the myth makes it seem, it's not actually going to work that way. And then we're getting into our witch's brews now. So one of the things that we see a lot from homeowners and sometimes from master gardeners is what simple, non-toxic, cheap household product is going to eliminate your weeds. So they don't want to go out and buy weed killer. They don't want to have to hand pull these pesky weeds. But they would like to just like reach into their cabinet and pull something out that they already have at their home to try and combat the weeds in their yard. And something to keep in mind when you're looking at weeds is that a healthy landscape of plants and turf is going to be your best defense against weeds. Some plants are invasive, and some of those invasive plants we intentionally planted, and some weeds are native, edible, and wildlife friendly. So weeds are here to fill a void. If there's nothing growing there, or if the plant is already sick, the weed is going to be able to take over that area. We want to make sure that we're watering and fertilizing our landscape appropriately, so we aren't encouraging those weeds. Nothing is actually officially a weed, so it's only a weed if it's a plant that you don't want in your garden. I know for myself, I grow a lot of weeds in my garden because the bees visit them and the butterflies visit them, and I don't mind. And there are a great variety of weeds that have their own preferences and life cycles. So you have 3 main types when we're talking about weed control. That's grasses, sedges, and broadleaves. And all of these are going to have different life cycles as well. Some of them are here year-round, they're perennial weed. Some of them are only seen in the winter or summer. Some of them are biennials, they take 2 years to go to seed. There's a lot of different cycles here too. And the weeds in your yard can also indicate what your soil conditions are. Some weeds prefer more alkaline soils, some weeds prefer more acidic, some prefer sandier yards, some prefer wet yards. So looking at your weed species can really tell you what might be going wrong in your landscape. Some things to keep in mind when we're looking at weeds and weeding terms is when it comes to herbicides, we have contact herbicides. These are things that just kill whatever they come into contact with. So making sure you get good coverage over the weed is really important. Then we have systemic insecticides or herbicides. These are things that are taken up by the weedy plant, and they go through systemically through the plant in order to kill those tissues. So contact usually work a little quicker. Systemic usually take a little longer to get through the full weed. But there are 2 types that you're looking at when you're buying herbicides. You also have pre-emergent and post-emergent herbicides. Pre-emergent herbicides are taking care of the weeds before they sprout from seed. So they have to be put down before that season when the seeds are sprouting begins, and oftentimes they have to be reapplied to keep those seeds from actually sprouting. Post-emergent are used after you have your weed problem happening. So you're using those on weeds that are already present in your garden or lawn. And then, like I said, we have our 3 different categories of weeds, and typically herbicides are going to work based off of these categories. So you have herbicides that work on broadleafed weeds within your yard, herbicides that work on grasses within your yard, or herbicides that work on sedges and rushes in your yard. And there may be some overlap between these, but a lot of times, especially if you're trying to control weeds in your turf grass, knowing what kind of weed within these 3 categories you have is the first step to figuring out how to control it if you want to purchase an herbicide. Also keep in mind the active ingredient and make sure you're reading the label. We have a lot of weed killers that can't be used on your turf above a certain temperature. So if you're using those in the middle of summer, you might be burning out your lawn even though that herbicide was considered safe for your lawn. In garden beds in particular, you could also, before we even get into what kind of weed killer to use mulch. I use a lot of mulch in my yard. It holds in moisture, so I don't have to water as often. I rarely water once a plant is established in my garden. It can decompose over time and add organic material. Like I said earlier, our soils here in Florida are usually really low in soil organic material, so adding that organic material is important. It can buffer the soil temperature, so keeping it a little bit warmer or cooler. And it often reduces weeds by up to 50% in a garden. You can see the estimated annual cost of common weed control methods here. And just using straw or bark mulch really helped a lot in reducing the costs of controlling these weeds and also just keeping these weeds down. There are also a lot of ways to get mulch. So many municipalities offer free mulch to residents at their landfill in their garden area. You can also call up and buy it in bulk by the yard. And there is a company, not endorsing it, but one that I use, which is called Chip Drop, where you can go online and put your name down for a local arborist to drop mulch off at your house as opposed to taking it to the landfill. So some of the myths that come with killing weeds in gardens usually deal with the chemicals that we might have in our house already. So one of the top ones would be vinegar being considered a weed killer. And this is because people say it dissolves the cuticle, if they think about it at all, and also that it's cheap and harmless. What we actually know is vinegar has acetic acid, which has herbicidal properties that can burn and desiccate or dry out the weeds. It can kill small annual weeds, especially when it's hot and used in full sun. But it needs a higher concentration than what you would buy at the store. So the vinegar we're seeing on the screen here is usually the white household vinegar you'd have, which is about 5% acetic acid. What would actually kill the weeds is 20%. So you need a much higher concentration of this vinegar or acetic acid in order to actually kill your weeds really successfully. It also needs full contact, so just pouring it on the top of the weed isn't going to really work. It needs to be contacting all of the leaves. It's a contact killer, not a systemic killer, so it has to touch the surface. And it really doesn't really work well on grasses. It's also more toxic than glyphosate or Roundup to small mammals. So when you're using it at the concentrations that kill weeds, it's also even worse for mammals than glyphosate. And it's more expensive than glyphosate would be if you're buying it by the gallon. So not recommending either one of these, but in particular, the vinegar that you can buy at the store really isn't going to do much weed killing for you. Another one I hear is salt kills weeds, and it's cheap and harmless to humans. We use it in our food. What could possibly be the problem with using salt to kill weeds, right? So salt in the soil will not allow plant roots to properly absorb the nutrients that they need. It will kill them. You can see in the picture, it's killing these weeds that are in this person's bricks. But it is changing the soil's salinity, and it won't allow other plants to grow either. So this definitely isn't something you want to use in your turf grass. It's not something you want to use in your garden beds. Salt can also harm soil organisms, so this can be really bad for the worms that are crawling around in your soil or the other beetles and bugs that might be crawling around and helping to decompose things. And you can easily put too much salt in the soil by doing this kind of treatment. So again, this is one you really don't want to use in your landscape beds, in your turf grass, maybe in the way that's being used in this picture in the bricks of this person's yard, but it is water soluble, so this is washing down into the soil underneath or washing down your driveway, which is not ideal either. Another one I've heard from some people is boiling water is going to be killing weeds cheaply and quickly. And this one will kill, boiling water is going to kill anything that it touches. So you have to do good coverage of the plants you're trying to kill without damaging nearby good plants. So if there are good plant roots underneath where you're putting this boiling water, it'll also kill them. There's no residual in the soil chemically, though it could kill your earthworms or soil arthropods and microorganisms in that soil. So yeah, it does kill weeds pretty successfully on contact. Carrying a container of boiling water out into your garden may be a little bit more dangerous than some other options you have, like hand pulling, but it is an option. One that I find kind of scary that I've seen it from a couple people is using bleach to kill weeds safely and quickly. First of all, bleach is not a super safe chemical. I mean, it's a little bit scary how, I guess, blasé people are about using bleach for just about anything. Make sure you're reading those container warning directions. It is not listed as an herbicide. It does kill plants on contact. It is a contact, non-selected herbicide, so it has to cover all of the plant, but touch nothing you want to keep. It also has a pH of 11, so it will change your soil pH, at least briefly. And it will increase that pH and add sodium, which again, sodium, salt, we're making it harder for other things to grow in these areas as well. So bleach is not something that I recommend as an herbicide in your garden. Some helpful ones that you might have heard: a thick layer of newspaper below the mulch will reduce weed growth. Newspaper works really well for this. I also use cardboard. Everybody's getting Amazon packages these days. We're at home, stuck at home, and a lot of people are shopping. So on recycling day, I'll go around and pick up cardboard boxes around my neighborhood or bring them home from the office. And cardboard works really well in this way too. So 3 to 4 sheets of newspaper or a layer of cardboard is going to provide an additional barrier that should keep down weeds in addition to mulch on top of that. The newspaper is going to degrade over time. It breaks down and turns into more nutrients in the soil and does allow water to percolate through. So I like using cardboard because it's so readily available. Newspapers, if you get a daily newspaper, also are useful. Weed fabric is another one that people will use for weed control in their gardens. And because this doesn't break down really well, oftentimes, even though it does work initially for weed control, the weeds will either grow through it or over the top of it, and then it becomes really hard to pull those weeds. And it doesn't break down, so you have this weed fabric in the way when you try to do further plantings in the future. So partially true, I wouldn't consider weed fabric as useful as just a regular mulching cycle. And then for the final part of the talk today, we're going to talk about some more witches' brews, which is what's the one thing that's going to kill all your pests and diseases that you have at your house? Which, again, I think after you've watched the rest of this presentation, the answer is probably nothing, right? We got to do some other things before we get to this point. So first, consider integrated pest management, or IPM. We want to try and prevent pest problems by following those 9 Florida-friendly principles, starting with number 1, right plant, right place. We want to scout and monitor really regularly for pests in our gardens. So keep an eye out for things that look weird and check and make sure it's not a pest or disease that's doing that. Identify the pest or insect before you start spraying. Make sure that it actually is a pest and isn't a beneficial or just somebody that's not doing anything to your garden. And then consider our different control methods. On the topic of prevention, make sure you're watering correctly. Don't water too much or too little. Make sure you're fertilizing appropriately. Again, not too much or too little. And then mow and remove thatch when it comes to your turf. So mowing at the appropriate height, making sure that your blades are nice and sharp. And then if you do get a thick layer of thatch, make sure you're removing that thatch pretty regularly. Healthy plants are going to be your best defense against insect problems. Scouting is the next step of IPM. So you should be out in your gardens a couple times a week. You guys are master gardeners. Enjoy your garden, right? Go out there, check and see if you've got weird stuff under your leaves, weird stuff going on in your turf. Pull back the turf and check for bugs if it really looks awful. Check for plant damage, look at the undersides of those leaves, and then consult with your extension agent or consult with other master gardeners and confirm the insect ID before you start spraying. Again, if these are harmless insects, it's fine to leave them alone. We only want to start doing any kind of treatment when we know that we have a pest presence at a level that's unacceptable. For our control methods, you start with hand removal, so picking those caterpillars off of your tomato plant as opposed to spraying it. Move on to biological control, using things like BT or encouraging good beneficial insects in your garden to help control those pest insects. And then finally moving into pesticides, starting with biorational pesticides, things that don't do a lot of harm to the general environment or non-target pests or non-target insects like insecticidal soap or oil or thuricide, the BT I was talking about. And then moving into the more conventional pesticides if the biorationals are not an option. So what are some myths that you might have heard about insects and controlling insects and disease in your garden? One that I've had people repeat to me a couple times is feeding grits to ants. The grits are going to expel in their bodies and cause them to explode. As somebody who keeps a carpenter ant colony here in the extension office for our insect ambassador program, this is not one that actually works. If you've ever watched ants eat, they'll take solids back to the colony in order to feed those to their babies, but they break those down pretty heavily. And the ants themselves only eat liquids. So they're only injecting liquefied proteins like bugs that have broken down or sugary stuff. They don't actually want any solids. So grits aren't going to cause them to explode because they don't eat them. Boiling water will kill ant hills is another one I've heard. And this is one that actually works if you have enough boiling water to kill the whole colony. So just like with the weeds, boiling water will kill anything it comes into contact with, ants included. Another one I've heard is shoveling ant mounds together will cause a war that takes out both the colonies. So you shovel them together, they get real angry at each other and kill each other. And especially for fire ants, which is what most people are worried about when they're shoveling colonies together or doing any of these activities. Fire ant colonies are actually rarely territorial. Handling the mounds is going to increase your chances of being bit, and some fire ant colonies will create super colonies with multiple queens. So shoveling them together could just be introducing them to some nice neighbors that they want to cohabitate with. Unproven. There are some really great guides on controlling fire ants online from the IPM Institute, and University of Florida has some really great guides, but using regular baits and putting baits around the mounds is usually your best bet if you have a really bad fire ant problem. Another one I hear from a lot of people is planting mosquito repellent plants in order to get rid of mosquitoes in your garden. And unfortunately, this one isn't true either, even though I really would like it to be. Concentrated lemon eucalyptus oil is an approved mosquito repellent that you can apply to your skin, and that'll repel them for about 20-30 minutes at a time, I think, because it's a volatile oil. It's going to be released pretty quickly. You have to reapply because it's volatilizing. Lemongrass, citronella, garlic, etc. have not actually been shown to have an impact on mosquitoes and likely won't keep them away significantly. And most of these things aren't just releasing those oils into the atmosphere anyway, or into the garden around you anyway, until they've been disturbed. So you would have to be smacking the heck out of these plants to get any of those oils to release, which is probably going to get you sweating and breathing a little heavier and be more attractive to the mosquitoes than just putting on bug spray in the evening if they have a problem, or using mosquito bits or dunks in areas that have standing water nearby. Another one that often people try to use are black lights or high frequency devices, and those don't actually work either. The black lights with the buzzers on them actually kill more good bugs than mosquitoes, because a lot of our insects are attracted to those lights at night. So unproven on that one. Another one, and you should put bat houses in your garden because bats are awesome and they need a place to live and they have great poop. That is good fertilizer. But one of the myths that you hear is bats eat mosquitoes, so there won't be any in your yard if you have a bat house. And we do know bats can eat up to 600 insects an hour, and including those insects can be mosquitoes. But they're definitely not bats' favorite food because they're so little. Bats would prefer a nice juicy moth over a mosquito any day. Bats are not going to eliminate the mosquito populations in your garden, but they could be reducing pest populations because they're eating those moths that may be laying eggs on your ornamentals or vegetables. So bats are still good guys, but they're not actually doing a lot of work for mosquitoes. So partially true on that one. And then coffee grounds, killing Asian cycad scale is another one that I hear a lot for sago palms. What we know is that the sago palm scales do attack queen and sago palms. It'll eventually kill the palm if you don't treat for them. And anecdotally, we've heard of good success treating the crown of the cycad with the coffee grounds, but a study from the American Horticultural Society didn't actually observe scale mortality with coffee grounds. It did see results with using neem oil or orange oil. Again, I'd be a little bit careful using any oil here in Florida when we get hot in the summertime when a lot of these scales are more active because they can burn. Unsure on that one. So mothballs, repelling snakes and other pests. Mothballs are not listed for use outdoors. This is an illegal use of pesticides, and they also don't repel snakes and other pests. So they're bad for you. Naphthalene, which is one of the chemicals, have been shown to damage blood cells. The other chemical that's often used, which is paradichlorobenzene, causes vomiting and dizziness, and neither one of them are for outdoor use. They're used in enclosed spaces if you're going to use them at all. It's illegal to misuse this pesticide, and it can hurt you, your pets, and wildlife. I've seen red pepper sold as a oil at the store, and people want to use the cayenne pepper that they might have in their spice rack in their gardens. And the capsaicin that's actually in red pepper does trigger spiciness. It can be a contact repellent for mammals, so squirrels sometimes don't like it, but it needs to be reapplied pretty frequently. But others, like bears, are fine with this. I had one guy use the pepper oil, and he found that the deer actually seemed to like the spicier plants even more than the non-spicy plants. So your results may vary with this one, but the capsaicin in it does repel some things. Another one from your spice rack, garlic has been called a natural pesticide that's going to degrade quickly. And pests don't like it because they don't like the strong taste. This hasn't been shown in any research. It could make your edible plants taste bad if it was recently applied, if you want to go eat those edibles later. There's limited research on what it does to insects or pests, and when combined with mineral oil, which a lot of the recipes tell you to put the garlic in your mineral oil and then spray it, the mineral oil is probably what's actually doing the work. So unproven on that one too. Another one that UFIFAS actually just came out with a document on, so EDIS has a document on this now, is household soap will discourage pests but not leave chemical residue on plants. And unfortunately, what we found with household soaps, a lot of them, the formulations have changed and they have detergent in them as opposed to soap. And that detergent strips away the waxy cuticle of the leaves of your plants, making them desiccate and die. So making your own soap mix now is not typically preferred because it's hard to find soaps that will actually work for that. Whereas when you buy it, you're more likely to get the soap that's not going to harm your plants while also taking out the insects. On that one, unproven just because our soap formulations have changed so much over the last decade or two. Another one, mineral oil, vegetable oil, and essential oils will kill insects in your garden. You see a lot of homemade recipes for this. And oils do block the breathing holes that are on the sides of the insects' bodies, the spiracles, so they suffocate. They can also prevent gas exchange from egg membranes, so they're killing the eggs of the insects as well. But it's best used against small, immobile insects. And if you use the wrong kind of oil at the wrong time of year, oils are one that can burn your plant. So don't use these in the middle of the summertime, and test on a really small amount if you're going to use any kind of oil that isn't an insecticidal or horticultural oil approved for use on plants. So partially true on that one. On our fungicides, we've got a dilute mix of baking soda will kill fungus in the garden. This is another one that hasn't been shown to be true by research that we've done. It doesn't really have an effect on fungus because it doesn't kill the fungus. Instead, any antifungal activity that it has is actually just because it changes the pH around it, and sometimes that can change it into a pH that the fungus doesn't like to grow in. It also washes off really easily, so it's not working long term. Anytime you get water on the leaves that this is on, it's removed again. Milk, though, I guess milk is coming out as the champion of garden myths here in this talk. Spraying whole milk on your plants will kill off fungus. So what we found is in a greenhouse setting, in one of our research studies that we did, milk has actually been shown to reduce occurrence of fungal diseases and is known to be an antiviral in those greenhouse systems. It's not been tested on all crops or all funguses, but at least in those greenhouse settings where they did test it, it was shown to help a little bit with fungus and bacteria. Then finally, we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but plant selection has a lot of myths surrounding it. And one of those is marigolds are going to suppress root knot nematodes by releasing chemicals into the soil. They do work if you're getting the right species of marigold. Crepe myrtles act as a great host for beneficial bugs because there's a specific aphid that targets crepe myrtles that doesn't target other plants in your garden. So it's great to incorporate a crepe myrtle somewhere in your garden if you want to try and increase the amount of beneficial bugs there. But beyond those two, just planting native plants can increase your beneficial insects. So a larger diversity of plants is going to support a greater diversity of insects. It can also make it harder for pests to feast on their favorite host plants because it's harder for them to find it. So plant selection is a proven way to improve your garden, whether it's through selecting the right plant in the right place or going for things that increase the diversity in your landscape. For some quick tips to debunk myths, so I had to do a lot of research for this presentation because there's not just EDIS documents on all of it. But first, you could check UFIFAS EDIS documents. Like I said, that soap document that UF just came out with really goes into great detail on why making your own homemade soap isn't so much recommended anymore. You can also search for university websites talking about a topic by putting in site:/.edu and then your topic. So something like site:/.edu insecticidal soap would pull up almost any university that's talked about insecticidal soap, all of the documents that they have. If you want to do some super sleuthing and actually read research papers, which is some of what I had to do for this, especially with the milk stuff, going to scholar.google.com will help you with finding research papers that might be about the topics you're looking for. And in conclusion, We have a lot of old wives' tales and witches' brews that exist, and you see a lot of them on the internet. A lot of these won't do any harm, so they're not actually going to hurt much, mothballs being one of the exceptions there. But they might be more expensive and difficult than the conventional alternatives, and they might be a waste of your money. Remember your best practices whenever you're deciding to do stuff in your garden, and check to see if things are university supported when you're trying something new. And with that, I'll take any questions. And Ashley, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Kaydie. Awesome. Very awesome talk. We have many people in the room. We have about 5 minutes for questions, so let me start. Do we need more calcium if we live near the ocean?
Soil test is going to tell you that, so I can't tell you. Just based off the top of my head, you'll want to get your soil tested.
Yes. How about soaking banana peels in water and using the water for the tomato plant?
So doing like a banana water soak. I couldn't find any research on that one. It was one that I saw in conjunction with the banana peel myth. So again, I don't think it's going to hurt anything to do that. I just am not sure how much it's actually going to help. Composting the banana peels seem to be the best way to release that potassium back into the soil.
Okay, that might be the same thing for this question. Can I feed banana peels to my staghorn?
Yeah, so like I said, my mom did that a lot when I was a kid. Again, they're taking nutrients out of whatever soil or media that staghorn is utilizing before releasing it again. So it's better to compost them and then put that compost into your staghorn if you want to feed it that way, as opposed to just throwing banana peels in it. They're not going to do a lot of harm if you just throw banana peels in it, though. So that's what you want to do. It's not going to hurt anything. It just might not be super beneficial.
Okay. Can you add molasses to compost?
Can you add molasses to compost? I don't see why not. It again probably isn't going to hurt anything, but it's not one I've done any research on. I can't imagine it's going to help that much either. But as part of your compost, it probably is going to break down and add some nutrient content. So I don't see it being an issue.
I was told that coffee ground was good to add acidity. Is that true?
They don't add that much acidity. Based off of what I was reading from researching for this, it's mostly better as a nitrogen source and just increasing that organic material in the soil over time.
Okay. Does the temperature in the compost bin have an impact on whether the manure of a herbivore farm animal can be used safely?
No, so based off of university documents and the research that I did, for the most part, our herbivores don't have diseases that might be a problem for humans or pests that might be a problem for humans. So they're typically pretty safe to use in your compost either way. That's the reason you don't want to use the carnivore excrement, though, is because we actually don't get hot enough to kill off any bacteria in there usually, or at least all of the bacteria. So you want to be more cautious about that.
Okay. Does coffee keep bugs carrying disease away?
That was another one that wasn't supported by the research so far, although people do like putting it in the crown of their sago palms, and a lot of anecdotes say that that helps, but no research to back that one up.
Alrighty. That's pretty much all I'm seeing in questions. I want to thank Kaydie again for this amazing talk. We had a very good turnout, and also thank all of our participants for being in this conference. This is the last session of the conference, and encourage you to fill out your conference evaluation. I think maybe it was emailed to you.
It's going to be emailed on Monday.
There you go.
Good job. Thank you, everybody, for being so courageous and hanging in there with us through the tech. You all were fantastic. I can't thank you enough. And thank you, Kaydie and Ashley, for this wonderful session. You both did a great job. But Kaydie, we knew that you were going to kill it with the witches' brews.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Excellent, excellent work. And look for the bookstore list, your eval, and then we were trying to get those recordings to you as soon as we can flip it around and get them out to you. And that's exclusive access for those people who have registered, are registered participants. So thank you all so much for being with us. And I'm looking so forward to being in person next time.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you.
Thank you.